Yo, what up? Josh Rubin from East West Healing and Performance. Today I want to talk to you about the foot again. Now keep in mind, YouTubes are about education, not about giving you information to treat yourself, because I can't teach you how to treat your foot. The bottom line is this: you need to understand, we're going to talk about plantar fasciitis, where it's coming from, because there's so many people that call us and that we've worked with that are suffering from plantar fasciitis, and everyone's just rubbing the bottom of their foot, using balls, doing cold water baths, and some of the times that stuff can help. But if we look at the body as more of an integrated system, it's going to start to make sense that it actually come from many different areas of the body. I'm going to try to go over some of those areas today so you can kind of get a better idea of who you should work with, and if what you're doing is not working, and where else maybe you should look in the body. Now, the foot is actually the most understudied and utilized aspect of the body. We're going to talk about the arches. We're going to talk about some of the ligaments. We're going to talk about the bones and so forth and the joints. The bottom line is this: it helps us keep us vertical. It has a static role in the body, dynamic, so we can actually absorb forces, turn them from potential to kinetic energy, and basically it receives weight. Has more of a fluid role in the body, which has to do with the diaphragm of the foot, and I'll talk about that. It has to do with the keystones, the fascia, and some of the muscles and bones. And at the same time, it has more of a sensorial. Helps us kind of find our way in space, when you're walking at night and you're trying to find your way when it's dark. So it has different roles, and the funny thing, we're on our feet all day. We're pounding our feet. They absorb force. They can be affected by all the descending aspects of the body. They can affect all the ascending aspects of the body. They can actually be affected by all the gravity lines in the body. They can affect all the fascial lines in the body and be affected by all the fascial lines in the body. So the question is, how come most people don't look at the foot? How come most people don't study the foot? They study it in a general sense. But if we look at the foot, you get different joints. You got your lateral arch and the medial arch. This is your right foot. The lateral arch has less bones. You get calcaneus, cuboid, fifth metatarsal. That's the lateral arch, less bones, more structural, more rigid. That's where we receive about 30% of our weight with gait. 60% in the calcaneus, 30% laterally. And then on the medial arch, you have more bones. It's more flexible, it's more adaptable, more proprioceptive. You have the calcaneus, talus, navicular, first cuneiform, and first metatarsal. So we have to think about the arches. We have to think about other joints. And of course, all the bones, like Chopard's joint, Lisfranc's joint. We have to think about the cuboid navicular pair with inspiration and expiration. We have to think about the subtalar joint, which is the talus and the calcaneus, how they move together upon inspiration and expiration, how they move upon eversion and inversion, and how they move upon dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. At the subtalar joint, that's where we get true eversion and inversion. So when people say pronation and supination, they're saying part of eversion and inversion. Because at the subtalar joint, you have a vertical axis, that's where you adduct and abduct. And you have an AP axis, anterior-posterior. That's where you get external rotation and internal rotation. So, or pronation and supination. So if you adduct the foot and you externally rotate, that's inversion or true inversion. And if you bring the foot this way and you abduct it and you internally rotate, that's a true eversion, or what people call a pronation. Then you have the talocrural joint, which is the fibula, tibia, and talus, how they work together, how they work on dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, because that's a joint that you actually get at the transverse joint, more oblique. You get true dorsiflexion and plantar flexion at the subtalar joint. So when it comes to the foot, we have to think about all these different things. Now when it comes to plantar fascia, of course we have the plantar fascia that goes along the bottom of the foot to the calcaneus. That's actually part of the diaphragm of the foot. You actually have a diaphragm in your foot, you have a diaphragm in your pelvis, you have a diaphragm in the thoracic area, and you have a diaphragm in your cranium. All these diaphragms work together on inspiration and expiration to normalize bones, ligaments, muscles, lymph, the nervous system, the sinuses, the glands of the body, and so forth, and the bones. So to think about that. So the plantar fascia actually plays more of a passive role. More of an active role, we have the tibialis anterior, which comes around this aspect of the foot and attaches to the calcaneus, talus, first, second, third cuneiform, and the second, third, fourth metatarsals. Then you have the peroneus longus, which comes from under the foot laterally and goes medial and attaches to the first cuneiform and first metatarsal. It's kind of like a stirrup under the foot. Other muscles that actually are involved more actively in the diaphragm of the foot, or what we call the plantar fascia, what everyone generalizes, is, I said, the peroneus longus, you have the peroneus brevis, you have the tibialis posterior as well as the tibialis anterior, you have the abductor and adductor hallucis, reading my notes here, and the abductor digiti minimi. So those are considered the actual diaphragm, or what you call the core of the foot. Every time we inhale, the arch and the vault, or the diaphragm of the foot, deepens, plantar fascia tightens. The keystones of the foot, major one is the second, cuneiform, rises. On exhalation, the diaphragm of the foot, or the vault, or the plantar fascia, loosens and deepens, and the second cuneiform or the keystones actually fall back to normal. So you get a rising on inhalation and a flattening on exhalation to neutral, not a complete flattening. So if you think about this, if in general the foot is locked in an inhalation lesion, you're going to have tightening of the plantar fascia and issues in a lot of those muscles. So you have to think about this. With all that we do, everyone's just focusing on the fascia. What if it's those muscles that are actually causing a tightening of the fascia? What if it's the long and short plantar ligaments? What if it's the spring ligament, which help with proprioception? What if it's issues with those ligaments in the foot? What if it's an issue with the cuboid navicular pair, which are right here, if you can see those? And every time you inhale, the cuboid externally rotates and the navicular internally rotates. It's one of 3 bones in the body that actually internally rotate on inhalation. There's a small movement. So bones move when we breathe. Bones have life. Now the problem is, if those bones in a general sense get locked high, or they're lesioned high, or one of them's high and one of them's low, and so forth, that can actually put tension on the plantar fascia, causing plantar fasciitis. So it could be a lesion in those bones actually causing plantar fasciitis. It could be the talus of the foot, which is right here, under the tibia. The talus could be lesion anterior, meaning it's anterior and won't go posterior. And if it's anterior, it can actually pull on the posterior capsule of that joint and on the calcaneus, putting tension on the, let's say, posterior compartment of the leg, like the gastroc, putting tension in the plantar fascia. So it could be an issue with the talus. I mean, there's so many joints and so many bones of the foot that we can start to see there could be an issue with the talocrural joint. Every time you breathe, the fibula actually ascends, it posteriorizes, it actually lateralizes and internally rotates. So it's another bone that internally rotates. So if that bone is lesioned in that position and it won't go back for some reason because of muscles or ligaments or the interosseous membrane and so forth, we'll actually have the same thing happening in the foot. The foot itself will be locked in an inhalation lesion, which can cause plantar fasciitis. We have to look at other aspects of the body. You can look at the femur, you can look at the tibia, you can look at the patella in relation to the fibula. You can look at the innominate bone, which everyone calls the iliac. So if you look at, this is a left iliac, a lot of people call this anterior and posterior rotation. So on inhalation, the sacrum, always in a sense, sorry I'm messing this up. This is actually a right innominate. This is actually, let me line this up correctly here. So on inhalation, the sacrum always posteriorizes like this. It goes into post-flexion, or what people call cranial extension. And the innominate is basically relatively anterior to that. So if you're innominate for some reason, whether it's muscles, ligaments, the inguinal ligament, pectineal fascia, it could be the kidneys, it could be many different muscles and organs, but if it's lesioned anterior, meaning it won't go posterior, that can actually create an inhalation lesion of the foot, which causes tension in the plantar fascia. So it could be your innominate bone, or the iliac, the pubis, or the ischium that are actually causing the problem in the foot. Same thing with the sacrum. If you look at your sacrum, you have 22 axes of rotation in your sacrum. So at S3 here, that's the axis of rotation that the innominate actually anteriorly rotates and posteriorly rotates. So if you have a lesion on that axis of S3, if you lesion through the oblique axes on the sacrum, where the sacrum actually moves mechanically during gait, and it's locked, let's say, or lesioned in one of those positions, you'll actually get a anterior rotation of the sacrum depending on which way it's rotating, which can cause issues with femur, tibia, patella, fibula, the talocrural, subtalar joints, cuboid navicular, causing an elevation of that plantar fascia, causing plantar fasciitis. We have to look at the lumbar spine as well. Now, the lumbar spine is actually adaptable. It adapts to the sacrum. It typically does whatever the sacrum tells it to do. You can think of the cranium, you can think of the thoracic spine, and you can think of kind of the pelvis as our life spheres, because we get the brain, the heart, and the reproductive organs. But you think of the cervical spine and the lumbar spines, those are our adaptable spines, and they typically move in opposition of the other parts of the spine. So if we have a lesion in the sacrum, we have issues in the lumbar spine, that of course, a hyperlordosis or some people will say more of a straightening of the curves and a decompression of the curves, that can easily cause plantar fasciitis in the foot. We can look at the SBS, or in the cranium, like I've talked about before. You think of the occiput and sphenoid. So you're looking at the front of your cranium, and this is the back of your cranium. So inhalation, I'm exaggerating, they go like this. Exhalation, they go like that, back to neutral. So if for some reason through muscles, ligaments, fascia, bone, it could be bony, it could be sinuses and so forth. If this complex is locked or lesioned in inhalation, that's going to put an inhalation lesion in the foot. Now, we don't know which one's primary, but that can cause plantar fasciitis. Same thing with your temporal bones on the side of your head. They actually mimic what the innominate do. So if your temporal bone is lesioned anteriorly, this way it won't go back with exhalation, because it goes inhalation, exhalation. That can actually cause issues in the innominate as well as plantar fasciitis. So I'm trying to give you all these basic examples. Hopefully one of them aligns with you, but the bottom line is this. The body is a system of systems. So if you're working with someone, they're rubbing your foot, I'm not really trying to put anyone down, but you have to look elsewhere. You can't look at the body like this and say, you have problems with your feet, so let me look at your foot. That could be maybe the branch of a deeper-rooted issue. Or it could be the primary issue that's causing issues elsewhere in the body. So hopefully you've enjoyed this clip. I'm out of here.